So welcome everyone to our June Lunch and Learn session. Everyone is muted as you join the webinar. I'm going to ask you to stay on mute until the end of the presentation, and then we can open it up for questions and discussion. There's also a Q&A function there at the bottom of your screen and a chat, which I'll keep an eye on. So feel free to use those and put comments in as we go. That's very helpful. We are recording this session, and the link to the recording and the slide presentation will be provided to everyone who registered early next week. It'll also be available on demand to all NEWMOA members. So thank you for joining us today to learn about landfill capacity in the Northeast, and specifically capacity for biosolids. And I suspect this will be no surprises for some of you as to landfill capacity and its limited role in this suspenseful drama we call biosolids management in the Northeast. But today we will hear from Jennifer Griffith, a project manager with the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association, who led the project that you're going to hear about today. She manages a variety of projects for NEWMOA's waste site cleanup and solid waste programs. In the solid waste area, Jennifer manages projects focused on what people and companies throw away, because as we know, there really is no away, and that creates many problems. So examples of what she works with include wasted food, tires, construction and demolition debris, and regular trash. And in the waste cleanup area, she facilitates information sharing on emerging contaminants such as PFAS, and coordinates state and EPA brownfields redevelopment programs, organizes technical training for staff and others. And prior to that, she worked in consulting for various firms with landfill design and waste site investigation and cleanup. So she's the perfect person to be running this program. She has a BS in environmental engineering from the University of Vermont and an MS in technology and policy from MIT. I'm very happy Jennifer agreed to do this lunch and learn, because this is a very important topic, and I think it will generate a lot of questions and discussions. So let's get going. I see Jennifer's turned on her camera, so I'll ask her to go ahead and share a screen and take it away, but not to the landfill.
All right. Hopefully that worked and you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for inviting me. And I know that there's several folks from the States on this webinar who might know better than me some of these things that I'm going to talk about. So I encourage people when you have something to add to try to do that either through the chat or maybe we can moderate that somehow. So I'm going to be talking about solid waste disposal capacity in the Northeast. And like Janine introduced me, I'm a project manager with NEWMOA. So I'll just start out with what is NEWMOA. We are the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association. We were formed by the New England governors back in the 1980s. And then subsequently, New York and New Jersey joined NEWMOA, which is why we are the Northeast Waste Management Officials Association and not the New England, because we do have two members that are not New England states. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit association of the solid waste programs in the states, the hazardous waste programs, the waste site cleanup programs, and also the pollution prevention and toxics use reduction programs in the 8 states. And if you want to learn more about NEWMOA, I put the website here. And I sort of have to apologize for these old-fashioned slides, but I just didn't have the bandwidth to get more creative with this presentation. Sorry about that. So I'm going to be talking about, and the reason why I think we were contacted was we did publish a report back in 2001 about solid waste disposal capacity. And this was a mix of disposal data provided by the states from either 2018 or 2019. Generally, things don't change too much, so we felt it was okay to sort of combine those 2 years. And it provides a regional summary and then also state-specific information. Now, back in 2001, 2000, when we were asking questions and working on this report, biosolids management wasn't on the forefront. So it doesn't have information specific to biosolids. But I did contact all the states, more recently, asked for updates that they have, and I did ask them about their sludge, wastewater treatment plant sludge management. So didn't hear back from everybody or get the best information from everybody, but I will provide you with what I did obtain. So I think, as most of you know, it's not a very good or hopeful story in terms of disposal capacity in the Northeast. So some basics about the report. It is about facilities located in our region, the 8 states. The data is the total solid waste disposed at facilities that dispose of MSW, so that's landfills and also waste to energy facilities, and also landfills that dispose of the waste to energy facility ash, C&D, bulky waste, that sort of thing, contaminated soil. It is broken out between MSW disposal and sort of the other solid waste. We also break it out by what's generated in the state that's where the facility is located, and then also out of state, the percentages. And also broke it out with waste to what's going to waste to energy facilities, what's going to landfills that have capacity permitted out into the future, and then landfills that have capacity that's really, they're coming up on their permit limit. We really, states can only really talk about capacity that is permitted. So there's, potential additional capacity, particularly if some of these landfills can expand, but the report and what I'm going to talk about is really just what's permitted. So that's that. And I think this is just I know you're here because of biosolids, but it's also just good general knowledge as a citizen who generates trash yourself, to have a better idea about what's going on with solid waste management. So some fundamentals just to get everyone on the same page. State environmental agencies do not have the authority to direct where solid waste is disposed of. State's overall role in solid waste management is to permit and provide regulatory oversight for disposal facilities that other entities, mostly private ones, propose, develop, and operate. And state environmental agencies do not have the authority, the funding, or the responsibility for developing new capacity. So just put that out there. So in general, this is from the report. Looking across the whole region, all 8 states, and New York and New Jersey are obviously bigger than the states in New England, but about over 35 million tons of solid waste was disposed at facilities in the 8 states. And of that, about 2/3 of it is municipal solid waste, regular trash, and about 1/3 of it is the other solid waste, the C&D, the contaminated soil, the wastewater treatment, the waste to energy facility ash. So in terms of in-state versus out-of-state, so again, we're looking at the whole region. About 88% is generated in the same state where it's disposed. Again, if you're looking across all 8 states, that's a generality about, so each individual state's different. And then about 12% in total was generated in a different state. So those are just some general things. And again, this report was published a couple of years ago, but at that time, about 1/4 of waste was going to landfills that were going to reach capacity by about 2028. No, 2026. About a third of it is going to waste to energy facilities and 44% at landfills that have capacity out further into the future. So now I'm going to go sort of state by state, give you just kind of the situation in 2000 the year that they reported for the report, and then kind of the update. So about 2.5 million tons of solid waste was disposed in Connecticut at 5 small C&D bulky waste landfills, about 5 waste to energy facilities, and 1 waste to energy ash facility. About 73% was municipal solid waste and 27% the other. About 96% was generated in Connecticut, and only about 4% came from out of state. And they, Connecticut in general, exports a significant quantity of other waste out to Ohio, other meaning C&D mostly, and MSW goes out to Massachusetts and New York for disposal, as well as out of the region. So that was Connecticut then. And this is sort of the picture there. Connecticut is very reliant on waste to energy facilities. They do have those other landfills, which are not for MSW. None of them take MSW. There's no landfill in Connecticut that takes MSW. And about 9% of the total is due to at a facility that would close within 5 years. So updates from Connecticut, the situation got a lot worse because one of the biggest waste to energy facility in Connecticut just shut down last summer. It disposed of over 500,000 tons a year. So that's really increased their exports of MSW to other states. Generally, wastewater treatment plant sludge is that's generated in Connecticut is managed at 5 sludge incinerators that are in Connecticut. And there is 1 municipal C&D landfill that disposes of the sludge generated at its own POTW, but that's really the only landfill disposal of sludge happening in Connecticut. And it's really a municipal situation where they can control what comes to their landfill, and a special waste disposal authorization was needed. In Maine, there's about 2 million tons of solid waste was disposed in Maine at 7 landfills, 3 waste to energy facilities, and 2 waste to energy ash landfills. About 59% was MSW and 41% was other waste. About 91% of what was disposed in Maine was generated in Maine, and about 9% came from out of state. And just for general knowledge, relatively small amounts of MSW are exported from Maine, so go to New Brunswick in Canada and also to landfill in New Hampshire. So all the states really, almost all the states import MSW for disposal, and all states export it. So, you know, no state is doing everything for themselves. And in Maine, the situation in Maine changed from this diagram here because there was a big landfill, one that received 545,000 tons. So almost all of the orange area there that had a permit that was renewed, or expanded. So that whole situation. So Maine is basically should be all yellow, and then the waste to energy facilities take about 20%. So so the situation in Maine doesn't look like this anymore. So the next slide. That Crossroads landfill expansion was permitted, extending its life to approximately 2040. I put that in here because you'll notice the 2040 year sort of comes up quite a bit. But then a distressing situation in Maine is that one of the waste to energy facilities is in sort of financial issues, and it's supposed to be auctioned. So MSW disposal in Maine will be affected by that. And I think you've discussed a lot at NEBRA about C&D limitations at the Juniper Ridge landfill. So that's, is part of the bulking issue with sludges. And then everybody knows about the wastewater treatment plant biosolids land application ban. So that's sort of situation in Maine, making things not as good. Massachusetts in 2019 disposed of about 5 million tons of solid waste at 11 landfills, 7 waste-to-energy facilities, and 2 waste-to-energy ash landfills. About 80% is MSW and about 20% disposed of in Massachusetts' other material. About 92% is generated in Mass, and about 8% comes from out of state. And Massachusetts significantly exports other waste out to Ohio, and also and New Hampshire gets a lot of Massachusetts other waste, and then a lot of export of MSW to New Hampshire and over to New York in 2019. So here's the picture in Mass. So Massachusetts, like Connecticut, relies on waste to energy facilities quite a bit. Almost 2/3 of disposal in Massachusetts is waste to energy. And then you'll notice the landfills that have a longer lifespan is only 11% of the trash goes there, and 25% is going to landfills that have a limited lifespan that's approved anyway. So updates since 2019, 2 waste to energy facilities have closed. So those are small. They were small in the western part of the state, but they're now closed. And 3 landfills have closed. Solid waste landfill in the state continues to decline, about 30% less in 2021, which that's 2 years ago now, than there was in 2019. The quantity that's disposed of at waste to energy facilities in Massachusetts has been relatively consistent across time. Like I said, those 2 waste to energy facilities that closed were small. And Massachusetts wanted to note that rail transfer facilities are increasing. There's a lot of construction and facilities opening that are transporting solid waste via rail out of the region. And so there's solid waste going from our region all the way down to Alabama and South Carolina now. Massachusetts, that's happening, but also New York and New Jersey, trash is going to all the way down to Alabama from our region. In New Hampshire, about 2 million tons of solid waste disposed at 6 landfills, 1 waste to energy facility, and then the incinerator, there's 1 sort of trash incinerator, so it's not generating energy, it's just burning trash in New Hampshire. About 60% of what is disposed in New Hampshire is MSW and 40% other. So I think you remember I said Massachusetts sends a lot of other up to New Hampshire because New Hampshire, about only 55% of what's disposed of in New Hampshire is generated in New Hampshire, and about 45% comes from out of state. New Hampshire is the only NEMOA state that imports more MSW than it exports. But New Hampshire does export some MSW, mainly to Massachusetts. Here was the situation in New Hampshire a couple of years ago. So there are some landfills that have capacity permitted into the future, and some that are more limited. So permit expansions are an issue potentially in New Hampshire, and only about 10% of the trash is incinerated in New Hampshire. So the updates, there was an extension approved at one landfill, so, of the orange, of the orange here, one of those landfills has been an extension approved that extends its life out to about 2040. It's New Hampshire permits their landfill capacity to last a defined number of years. So basically it's a certain amount every year. So they can't really take more than the amount that will let them stay open for the whole time. So that's a limitation in New Hampshire. There are, however, about 65,000 to 85,000 dry tons of sludge that is disposed of at New Hampshire landfills per year, but it must be dewatered or bulked so it can pass a PATE filter test. So New Hampshire is disposing of quite a bit of sludge. In New Jersey, I know some people don't care as much about New Jersey, but I think that in the update part, you might. So about 6 million tons of solid waste is disposed in New Jersey at 13 landfills and 5 waste to energy facilities. A little over 2/3 of it is MSW and 1/3 of it is other. About 87% is generated in New Jersey and about 13% from out of state, mostly from New York. And New Jersey exports a significant amount of solid waste, particularly MSW, to Pennsylvania and Virginia. So this is their situation. Not that much landfill capacity that's potentially has issues. The updates, though, since 2019, one waste to energy facility, which was about 10% of the capacity, closed, and one of the smaller landfills also closed in New Jersey. So again, we're having things close and nothing really opening. So the capacity is just shrinking. So in New Jersey, there's no sludges are permitted for landfill disposal. However, this is what might be interesting, and maybe other states I consider. About 30% of the wastewater treatment plant sludges that are generated in New Jersey are beneficially reused as alternative daily cover at landfills in New Jersey. So, but it does have to be bulked, and so it's not liquid with another waste material. And in New Jersey, they have quite a bit of auto shredder fluff. So sort of after metal things can, particularly cars are shredded. There's sort of stuff left over that's not recyclable, and that's called fluff. And I guess they mix that with sludge, and then they put it for alternative daily cover on landfills. So that's the only state that I heard of doing anything about using sludge as a cover material. We'll look at New York in 2018. About 16 million tons of solid waste was disposed of at 35 landfills, 10 waste to energy facilities, and 1 waste to energy facility ash landfill. About 2/3 was MSW, and the other third, it was the other types of waste. About 90% was generated in New York and about 10% from out of state. And New York exports a significant quantity of waste, particularly MSW, to Pennsylvania and Virginia. And this was the situation in New York. Quite a few landfills that might reach their permitted capacity, and then about a quarter going to waste to energy facilities. So updates from New York, since 2018, just one relatively small landfill has closed. And MSW landfills in New York can accept wastewater treatment plant sludge, but it must be stabilized to at least one of these criteria. It has to be either digested or lime stabilized. And if that doesn't happen, then these are some of the you guys probably know this stuff more than I do, what these things mean, but I just looked at their regs and pulled these out. So these are the other criteria, and I think you just have to meet one of them for a landfill to be able to accept wastewater treatment plant sludge in New York. In Rhode Island, about 1 million tons of solid waste were disposed. In 2018, they had 2 landfills, one very small municipal landfill, and then the large quasi-state, it's sort of a quasi-state agency that runs the big landfill in Rhode Island. And about 82% was MSW and about 18% other, and 100%, technically anyway, of waste disposed in Rhode Island is generated in Rhode Island. That's the sort of benefit of the quasi-state ownership of the landfill, is that they are able to, because of that, not accept any waste from out of state. But then Rhode Island still doesn't handle all its waste, so there's significant exports of MSW. Not necessarily municipal town MSW. I believe that does need to go to the state landfill, but commercially generated MSW from businesses and that sort of thing. A significant amount of that does go to disposal in Massachusetts. And just some updates from Rhode Island. The small municipal landfill did close, so there's just that one large landfill in Rhode Island, and the big C&D rail transfers facility did open recently in Rhode Island. So those are main updates from Rhode Island. And the last state is Vermont. About a little over 500,000 tons of solid waste was disposed in 2019 there's just the one landfill in Vermont. About 73% of that was MSW and 27% of that was other. About 80% was generated in Vermont and 20% from out of state. All of the out of state waste is in the other category, and mostly coming out of Massachusetts. A lot of contaminated soil goes up from Massachusetts to Vermont. No out of state MSW is disposed at the landfill in Vermont. And Vermont does export a significant amount of MSW because the one landfill is way up on near the Canadian border. So the other part of the state doesn't always send its trash up quite that far. So some of the MSW from Vermont goes over to New York and some to New Hampshire for disposal. And updates from Vermont, landfill disposal is now under 500,000 tons in 2021 anyway, about 81% MSW and about 13% out of state. So a little bit different ratio there. The landfill is expected to reach its currently permitted capacity in 2040. And it does dispose of about 2,700 tons of sludge, which is about 25% of the generation in Vermont. And it must be dewatered to pass a PATE filter test before it can be disposed at the landfill. So just general observations that are not specific to biosolids or sludge, but waste to energy facilities in Connecticut and Massachusetts dispose of more than 50% of the solid waste. As we learned from both Maine and Connecticut, waste to energy facilities could decide to close at any time. Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York dispose of their waste to energy facility ash at landfills in Massachusetts that are going to be reaching or have reached their currently permitted capacity. If you look out 10 years, many more landfills will reach their currently permitted capacity. New York and New Jersey both expressed that they feel like their landfills will just expand, that's probably not a problem in New York and New Jersey for them to have, to maintain capacity. But landfills in Maine and New Hampshire probably likely to be able to expand, but that's less likely in Massachusetts. And I'm not sure about Vermont, about expansion there. And then just to note that Rhode Island and Vermont have just one landfill at this point, and Connecticut has none. Well, none that are MSW anyway. I guess there are a few of those small C&D landfills, but. And then I'm just repeat again, just to make sure everybody's clear, that the state environmental agencies do not have the authority to direct where solid waste is disposed or the funding or responsibility for developing new capacity. So I think that's basically the end of my presentation.
Wow, that was a lot of stuff. Thanks, Jennifer. So you should draw a map to show where all the different things are moving around the region.
We did. So every 2 years, although we haven't been able to do it for yet, since 2018 data, but we do a report where we do look at where MSW specifically goes for disposal. And we used to do a map with arrows on it, and then we just lost the technical capacity to do that.
Too messy.
Yeah.
Like in back of a,
yeah.
So there was one question. This would be a good one to get you all warmed up, I think. And then someone's raised their hand to talk, but can you talk a little bit about what a paint filter test is? A lot of states do require that for sludge to be deposited in the landfill. You got to dig out your old undergraduate engineering or something.
Yeah, I personally don't know, and I'm assuming that other people on this webinar could answer that a lot better than I can. It's a measure of how much liquid is in the waste. So I don't know what it corresponds to, though, personally.
I bet we have an engineer on here who could answer that question. I'll wait for them to come up. If not, I will get you an answer to that, folks.
Sure. Do you want me to stop? Should I stop sharing?
Or maybe then we can pull folks in here. I don't know how you maintain your cheery disposition, Jennifer, this light of this Chicken Little situation here. Here's a question. Do many states have caps or maximum quantities or percentages per month of biosolids that will be accepted to landfills, like in New Jersey? Do you know that?
Well, I think for New Jersey, they don't accept it for disposal, but they do allow it to be beneficially reused, they call it. And so for the alternative daily cover, so there is a, yes, states don't think it's appropriate to say, 5 feet of alternative daily cover a day is appropriate. Alternative daily cover is just you have to cover the waste in a landfill at the end of the day. You're supposed to be minimizing the amount of surface area that's exposed for trash disposal. You have to cover it at the end of the day because of vermin and birds and whatever. So they allow what they call alternative daily cover instead of using just soil. But yeah, states do put restrictions on how much alternative daily cover is acceptable. So
that it's not piling up when they can't use it.
Well, and they, yes, landfills have an interest in not having too much alternative of daily cover because they want to preserve the real moneymaker is the trash that's going into the landfill, and they want to preserve that capacity. So they don't want to take up a lot of the capacity with the alternative deal with the daily cover material. They want to
right, which is probably at a reduced rate for the municipalities too, I bet. All right, here's a question from New York. Can you speak to the trends on biosolids specifically, if you can, Jennifer? Any anecdotes on volumes received and accepted at landfills over the past few years? So what are you seeing happening with biosolids going to landfills?
Yeah, I unfortunately do not know a lot of that. The solid waste folks and the residuals management folks aren't always real connected. And so, I thought like in Massachusetts, wouldn't they know how much biosolids or sludges, sorry, Eamon, sludges are being disposed of. And, I don't think they track that specifically. So.
Speaking of Eamon, he just chimed in that the paint filter test confirms the dewatering numbers. And so basically it's supposed to be, should not have free liquid.
Yeah, landfills are not supposed to be disposing of liquids, because it's just creating even more leachate to manage. So, things that go into landfills are supposed to be dry.
All right, let's see. I did see someone with their hand up. Was that John? Oh, that's me. That's how I. If you want to unmute your mic, John, and maybe put your camera on, we'd be happy to take your question live. And while we're waiting for him, let's see. I have a question from Mass here. All right, so great presentation was a comment. And this might be beyond the scope of the study, but out of the New England facilities where MSW from New England is going, do you know the capacities there? Like, so the outside, like the New Brunswick, Canada situation, South Carolina, Alabama. Is that something you guys are tracking for the states, or are the states tracking that? That's a pretty interesting question.
The capacity in those states, or how long? I mean,
is that a sustainable option? Like, I guess maybe that's that's maybe a better question for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's all comes down to economics. So, at this point, those landfills are taking, the tipping fee for the trash is worth it. Our region, the capacity as it's not a good story, or a hopeful story. Capacity just keeps dwindling in our region. And so it gets more and more expensive. Facilities here that can dispose of waste charge more. And then the economics of building a rail transfer facility to ship trash long distances, becomes more and more realistic. And, we could, it could eventually, it's going all the way to Alabama now, and South Carolina and Virginia and Pennsylvania. So it depends on the rail infrastructure where it might go, but it is becoming something that is happening, is that landfills are siting themselves near rail so that they can take advantage of this way of transporting trash. And other states aren't as strict about some of their requirements as our states are as well. So, we always wonder, is Ohio going to start cracking down on gypsum wallboard? Creates a lot of hydrogen sulfide gas. Are they going to crack down on taking C&D from our states? They haven't yet. So, landfills have been spending a lot of money putting in systems so they can accept gypsum, C&D waste that creates gas. Yeah, it's all economics and it's pretty much in the private sector. Like,
Yeah. There's some good big picture questions here, but let me ask you a couple more specific ones. What's the #1 discussion topic at landfills in the Northeast? I think I know the answer, and it's 4 letters. Well, I didn't want to presume.
You know, I do have, well, the last calls that I had were about alternative daily cover, just states wanting to know what other states accept for alternative daily cover, but I don't, yeah, I haven't convened those folks in a while, so sorry about that.
The 4-letter word I was referring to was PFAS, but we can talk about that after. Let's see if we can answer some more of these questions. There's some big picture ones, maybe we want to ask you one of these now and let you expand on. But this question's like, what will happen when there are no more options to dispose of the biosolids? I know you can't really answer that question, but maybe you can just kind of tell us what you see, what's going on, what things are good that are going on, who's doing things well, or what does the future of waste management look like, and how can we help? I mean,
you know, I don't paint a very hopeful picture, you know, but the thing that,
Jennifer,
the thing that is sad, you know, is that it really falls back on all of us as residents and taxpayers, you know, that the cost of trash, and, you know, that's borne by the towns that, you know, are having to transfer it, you know, all these long distances, and the same thing with the biosolids, you know, and the sludges is ultimately it's communities that are having to pay these higher prices. So I just, you know, I'm not a biosolids expert, so I don't know. I don't know what I can say that's very hopeful, really, because I'm pretty nervous about waste to energy facilities for the trash, because, you know, they have to spend a lot of money to keep themselves functioning, and, you know, are the economics of and the energy, you know, electric prices, and yeah. And you know, our states rely quite a bit on waste energy, so.
John, I did unmute you. If you want to turn your camera on, then I'll let you ask a question. But I did want to just briefly touch on PFAS. Well, I know NEWMOA has been working on these, you know, producer responsibility laws and things. Where do you see that going? I mean, could that work for people? You talked about what we can do, source reduction, maybe our own choices. I know you guys are working on a lot of good stuff. You got a model PFAS legislation that you propose. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about PFAS? We have to talk about it, at least a little bit.
Oh, what can I say? So the model legislation is all about products for sale. So what we can purchase for our, you know, it's trying to control what's coming into the market and what is available out there. So it's about reporting PFAS containing products. It's about labeling them. It's about what's the other component? But it doesn't really touch on liability or take back or well, actually, I think there are some provisions in there about trying to make manufacturers more responsible for the products that they do put out there. It's not going to do anything to help a lot of us, though, because a lot of this stuff is residual. I mean, it should ultimately help landfills and wastewater treatment plants in the future as the inputs that they get, you know, go down. But there's a lot of residual in the system. We're looking at such small quantities. It's going to be really hard for PFAS to like become a non-issue, even if we stop we got to turn, what do people say? When you have a bathtub that's overflowing, the first thing you got to do is turn the water off, so we're trying to turn the water off with the legislation, or the model legislation. So it's up to everybody to adopt the legislation. NEMOA is just developing a model. There is momentum in some states to try to do something. This capacity issue is another thing. States, Rhode Island tried to do something about its capacity by having, this quasi-governmental landfill and making different rules for it. States could step in, but you need the legislature to be doing these kind of things. It's not the role of the environmental agencies to be dealing with capacity.
I did not realize that. So yeah, thanks for stressing that. We'll give them a break on that. Here's another question. I don't know if you can, but maybe something you could start tracking for us going forward. But you tracking tipping fees, trends in tipping fees at all, specifically for biosolids, but other materials?
No, NEMOA has, we did. So, if a topic is a priority, I can do like a survey of the states and try to compile some of that. But again, the states, most of these facilities are private facilities, and, tipping fees vary. Sometimes they have contracts with people, then there's the spot market, so.
No, it's very complicated. Really, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really not something that's easy to do, and NEMOA doesn't do it. There might be, there's other solid waste trade associations and stuff. They might be. We have been trying
to, just for folks that are on, we have been trying to track some of the bid prices for biosolids disposal. And I may have some of that information if you're interested, but it's probably averaging about $200 a wet ton right now. Jeff McBurney, I was able to unmute you, I think, if you would like to add to the discussion.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, there you go. So yeah, just way back to that question about landfill caps on sludges. Typically, there's no regulated caps, but it's just a matter of managing sludges into landfill. So obviously, the critical component of that is the stabilization that Jennifer mentioned, and that's more for odor control. But it also usually means there's a lessening of free moisture, and that's the whole paint filter test or free liquid test. There can't be any free liquid in that material. Now, having said that, and having sent trucks to landfills before, the ride over to the landfill, you can have some waste, discharging from the truck. But again, it can't be copious amounts. It's just natural. So the real cap is placed on it by the landfill managers, who basically have to, it's basically a recipe, how much bulky material we're going to get. So they'll stack up their MSW trucks and bulky waste and things like that. And they'll only allow as many sludge trucks in as they know they can reasonably manage in their hours of operation. So they can't have, sludge sitting on site. They can't have it in a truck waiting to dump. So ultimately that's the cap. So what we've seen, at least in the footprint I operate in, is that most of our landfills won't accept much more than 10% of their total capacity on a daily basis. And that usually ensures that the material is going to be stable and can be compacted. Now, if we do go to using it for ADC, alternate daily cover, then maybe you can take a little bit more, but even then that has to be bulk too. And that's usually the holdup, is how much material do you have that you can adequately structurally make that cell sound so you continue to add waste to it.
Yeah, and as you know, Jeff, wastewater treatment facilities can't afford any holdups. Their stuff keeps getting generated no matter what.
Yeah. And then as you alluded to, it's not getting any cheaper to do. But then the other alternatives, we're finding there's capacity elsewhere, but it's outside the region. And unless you've got a more efficient transportation mode to get there, it's only going to get more expensive and have bigger carbon emissions implication. So it's, there's no, we're all trying to work on the solution, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, I do think that that's a good point is, unfortunately, no authority is like thinking holistically, because does it make sense to be trucking or even sending by rail, trash all the way down to Alabama, from a carbon footprint, or, mildly contaminated soil, not even that contaminated, is being trucked, way from Massachusetts, way up to northern Vermont, or even, well over to the Buffalo area of New York. That's where some of the landfills have more capacity in that region of New York, but that's a long way. And, now there's regulations on trucking and how many hours truckers can drive. And, so sometimes it's a 2-day trip to get to Western New York. What are we doing with the climate? So, but
and it's not only that, but it's a snowballing effect with lack of trucks and drivers, and you're sending them out for longer times on one load. And it's definitely snowballing we're starting to find.
But I'm not sure what the solution is either, because nobody wants a new big landfill, as New Hampshire's been finding out with the proposal for a new landfill in New Hampshire. There's a lot of opposition anywhere that you're going to try to put one. So, and rightly so, probably. So, unless, the state legislature, gets into this more holistic thinking and sort of does something, but I'm not sure what that would be.
The silo thing is definitely a problem for us too.
Because I think, in some ways, PFAS is not good, but it has raised awareness of some of these fundamental essential services. And I do want to stress for anybody that looks at this in the future, I have a lot of sympathy for landfills and for wastewater treatment plants, because you're not generators of PFAS. You're not the bad guys at all, even though some environmental organizations might point fingers there. You're just the recipients of the material that you get. And it's really all of us and, and in that industry for, using these chemicals so pervasively, maybe when they don't have to be, but
it's tough on the waste side of life.
So it's, and then landfills and wastewater treatment plants are intimately connected in the cycle, but they're just managing what they receive because of our society, so
landfills could, with the leachate treatment systems that are evolving, could help break the cycle there. So there's some good stuff going on. John, did you from Senegal? Did you have?
Can you hear me?
Yes. All right. This
Yeah,
will be our last question.
I can't figure out how to turn my camera on, but I can at least turn my microphone on. So one of the things, as a service provider and also as a member of MABA, as we try to educate folks on the issue and our politicians and our environmental agencies, one of the things to help them out, I recognize they don't have that responsibility that you stressed, but trying to help them, we do need information. And one of the things I'm wondering is there a way your association could track the permitted capacities of these facilities, their daily permitted capacities, and then we could take that data, and if they were allowed or not allowed to take biosolids, we could say, for the facilities that can, we could look at 10% of that daily capacity or some other number and say, here we could derive a biosolids capacity number from that. And it would eliminate all the variables that you've discussed and recognize there are many variables that would make it a daunting task to, track actuals. But at least then we would have some baseline data to point to folks to say, hey, look, this capacity is dwindling, and we're reaching critical mass, if you will, because we're all trying to avoid that crisis. And and we want, generators, wastewater plant operators, they're doing a great job, right? They're protecting us every day. We don't think about it, we go take a poo regularly, and, we're glad for that. But we need this data to be able to show regulators, and that's sort of where.
Is that something that NEWMOA could help us with? I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, this NEWMOA has a couple of things going on.
Yes,
but, we're a very, we're small, very small organization on a very low budget, and especially for solid waste. NEWMOA doesn't have a lot of funding to focus on solid waste, so some of this stuff, and it's also, we're our directors are, we're a state association, so with the priorities of the states are what we work on. So with our very limited amounts, I mean, that's part of why 2018 MSW data hasn't been published yet, because 2020, sorry, we did publish 2018. 2020 data hasn't been published yet because I don't have
the choir, Jennifer.
The bandwidth to
all
work
about
on it,
small organizations.
So the states should know that stuff. It's a matter of contacting.
Maybe I can try and compile it. I think that's a good idea, John. I'd love to, and that was just be one leg of the disposal option. I'd love to compare it to the ever increasing amount of the biosolids that are being generated too.
Well, plus, I just have to say, yeah, in an ideal world, maybe 10% would be sludges or whatever, but there's a lot of competition for that space. And there's a lot, so I'm not sure that you would get the 10% even if you wanted it, so.
Sure, but I think particularly from a baseline point of view, we can start saying, and it wasn't too long ago that, I recall landfills accepting up to a third of their daily capacity in as wet waste, if you will. But that has changed recently due to slope stability and potentially heating issues at landfills. So, but having that baseline at least gives us some information to say, hey, what's going on? And then if a facility closes, we could, pretty quickly show that impact. And we should be able to develop numbers on the biosolids side of the house to say, hey, here's our annual production numbers and here's our capacity. But I really think that would help decision makers and our politicians to know what kind of situation they're in.
That's a great suggestion, John. I'll be happy to work with Mary on that.
One more thing I'll just say is now I forget what it was. Shoot, I'm having sorry.
Yeah, I have them all the time now. I know you're extremely busy. That's why I was so happy and thankful that you were able to take some time out of your busy schedule. This is an important issue. It's one very important outlet for biosolids. So we're going to continue to tune in to see what NEWMOA is up to in the future. I mean, just jump in if you remember what you were going to say, but I wanted to just thank everyone. All right. I was just going to thank everyone for joining us today. And we'll have another Lunch and Learn in July when you can learn more about Bioforce Tech 2.0, our carbon project out of California, using pyrolysis for biosolids to create some really great end products. I'll send out more information on that soon, but we have these lined up through October. If there's something you really want to lunch and learn about, let me know. I would be happy to make that happen. Send me an email or call. And that's it. Thanks again, Jennifer. Thank you everyone for attending today. Have a terrific weekend. See you at the next Lunch and Learn.
Great. Thank you very much. Hope this was helpful.